Hey y'all, and welcome back to Bourbon and Bones. This is our 11th episode. If you like what we're doing here tonight, go ahead and drop us a comment and hit that like button and subscribe below. Also, if you didn't know, we actually now have a Facebook page. The link is going to be in the pinned comment below, and it's Bourbon and Bones on Facebook. And so over the last week or so, we actually asked our Facebook followers to vote for one of 4 bourbons for us to try and review this week. And that would be Weller Full Proof, Wild Turkey Rare Breed, Blanton's, and Pikeful Rye. And so, by overwhelming demand, tonight we are trying Weller Full Proof. So we're really excited to do this for you because this is actually the whiskey that you chose. And we'd love to be doing more of this kind of content for you all, so go ahead and just remember to follow us on Facebook as well. And so, like often, we're going to dig into the history a little bit. So there is very little solid history from the time period when Weller began. It is rather shrouded in a little bit of mystery. So William Weller was actually born in 1825 and first released his bourbon using wheat instead of rye in 1849. And that was actually during the middle of the Civil War, which is kind of crazy to think about because during the middle of an absolute countrywide conflict, someone is tinkering with a bourbon mash bill. But nevertheless, he actually released it in 1825, and he died in 1899, and his distillery continued to produce his bourbon, until it was purchased in 1939 and became Stitzel Weller Distillery. And in 1972, they went totally bankrupt. So due to the bankruptcy, many of the brands were actually sold piecemeal, and Weller fell into the hands of Sazerac. And since Sazerac actually was already making a wheated bourbon, that being Pappy Van Winkle, they actually decided just to use the same mash bill, and that was their Lot B mash bill. Now Weller, with the same mash bill and with the same aging process in place, kind of became known as the rejected barrels of the Pappy line. And this actually is a very, very common folklore that Weller didn't quite make the cut of the Pappy line, and it became a Weller product instead of putting into the Pappy products. Actually, that just isn't true. They're actually they're aged in their own barrels the exact same way. It's just this is a Weller barrel and this is a Pappy Van Winkle barrel. I have no idea where this rumor came from. I did try to do some research into it, but it's actually the story I grew up believing. So I'm not really sure if that's just part of a folklore, but if you have any more information about it, I'd love to hear your comments on it below. And for the history of Weller, that's it. It's all the history. That there's not a whole lot happened with this product. They made a great bourbon for decades and decades and decades, and that was kind of it. It was finally purchased and still being made. Part of it now is the fact that it is so highly sought after, which, if you're from Kentucky, it's a little strange. And let me explain a little bit further, because here at Bourbon and Bones, we don't want to just share about bourbon and history. We want to talk about bourbon culture. And a bourbon culture that has grown to encompass everybody who has ever tried a bourbon and liked it. We want to invite you into what bourbon culture is. And Weller is an interesting thing for us because, all right, so first of all, it was named after William LaRue Weller, not Wellers. Big differentiation there. Please remember it is just Weller and Weller product. So that's our first step into the Weller bourbon culture. The second is that things like Weller Special Reserve used to be like my mixer. Like I used to make it, put it in my eggnog around the holidays, and we'd take it to a party and people would throw Coke into it because it was like 15 bucks for like a 175. And it was a really good bourbon for that. Now if I were to do that today, if I were to pour Weller Special Reserve into eggnog, I'd probably get throat punched by someone. So that was about 10 years ago is when I was starting to mix my Weller Special Reserve, and there was only Special Reserve and Antique 107 and Weller 12. And Weller 12 was a great bourbon. It was something we as bourbon drinkers would pull out for people, and we'd love it, and we'd like to have it in around. It's always a little surprising when something that was so commonplace has become highly sought after. And like, I get it. Weller's fantastic. It's definitely worth that kind of hunt. Part of bourbon culture is to share it. And so we always encourage, our viewers, if you find a bottle, share it with somebody. Because it is now really hard to get a hold of, and it's a great product. Some great juice. Again, inviting everyone into bourbon culture, it's to remind them that, hey, it's also to share and have with friends and family. So let's dig into the bottle a little bit. So it's Weller Full Proof, and that means that some years ago, they actually took the actual White Dog and they actually put it in the barrel at 114 proof, let it age, pulled it out, rolled it over and filtered it real fast and threw it into a bottle at 114 proof. And it is a non-chilled process, which means that if it gets a little bit cold, it's going to get cloudy because some of the fats in there from the mash bill are going to stay in there. And that's where a lot of the flavor comes from. And this is a wheated bourbon, like we've talked about before, from Maker's Mark. Link right here. Because it's wheated as opposed to a rye, like most bourbons are, it's going to be a little bit smoother, a little bit more delicate. Flavors are going to be very unique to wheated bourbons, and most of the spice you're tasting will be coming from the barrel itself. And so, without further ado, let's taste it. Of course, we start with a Glencairn glass. We're just going to pour about 2 ounces in. And right away, it's just this beautiful caramely, little bit of corn, nice citrus notes with it. I'll say this, if you do find a bottle of this, open it up and let it breathe a little bit, a day or two. It really blossoms. It kind of needs it. It's a little tight when it's first out of the bottle. And on the palate, it is so good. It is definitely that 114 proof. So, pro tip, when you're shooting a video, make sure you actually prep your palate before you do 114 proof, because if not, you kind of get that smooth stuff kind of feeling. Yeah, prep your palate still. It's 114 proof. It's not messing around. But so right now it is beautiful caramels, like almost like a toasted browned, like brown sugariness with it, like caramel candies, a big bold black pepper spice bill. Nice, a little touch of vanilla. Almost, it's more like now after it's kind of sit on your palate, it kind of dissolves into a vanilla-ness. It's just so nice. And the more you taste it, just the more of that caramely candy and a little bit of almost an apricotness just comes and plays across the palate. Very, very nice bourbon. So like always, we're gonna take a quick little break, throw some water in here, and see what happens. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's been about 10 minutes here in YouTube land. And we've thrown a little bit of water in here. We're going to taste again. And so right away, it is already a little fruitier. So you get a little bit more of that apricot-y kind of, maybe a cherryness to it. No, more apricot. Apricot definitely. And brown sugar, like toasted brown sugar. And on the palate you get this corn sweetness. I mean, just lovely, like a brown sugar dainty, which many of y'all might never had. It's actually just a pecan covered in brown sugar that's hardened, and you eat it around the holidays. It reminds me of that because it's a little bit nutty, this nice toasted brown sugar, and a little bit of this kind of butteriness, a little bit of a, not really buttery flavor, but the kind of feeling on the palate. Awesome. So now we come to the next part, which is the verdict. And the verdict is, if you can find this, you have to buy it at MSRP. Don't go secondary. This is right around the $55, $60 mark in my area. And it is worth every penny of it. It is quite possibly my favorite expression of the Weller series. It's wonderful. It's quite possibly one of the best wheated bourbons out there. And if you like to see a show with us kind of competing some barrel proof wheaters, let me know in the comments. That might be fun for me to do as I slowly get hammered on 100 and some odd proofs. Anyways, like always, we love a great bourbon. We love great stories, and of course, we love great fossils. So as we transition tonight, we're gonna talk about a little fossil here. And this is actually a gift from my uncle back in Kentucky, and I believe he found this in North Carolina. And it is an exceptional example of a horn coral. So this horn coral is part of an extinct order of corals called rugosa. Rugosa means wrinkled, and as you can see here from this very detailed close-up, that the fine lines actually look like they are a little on the wrinkled side. And this species is actually a relative, it's part of the same family as a jellyfish. So I know that might sound odd that's related to a jellyfish, but it's actually not this portion here. This is actually a shell that it grew in. The part that actually came out of the top, pictured here, the little tendrils, that is actually the animal, and that is what's related to the jellyfish. So as it lived on top, it was a filter feeder. And as you look close inside, it has a little bit of a bowl depression, and that's actually where it lived and had roots and would pull in nutrients. And so it actually would pull in calcium carbonate from the water itself, and it would build more and more of its shell. So each layer is slightly larger than the one before it. So also the animal itself actually would eat plankton. So as it was filtering the calcium carbonate out of the water and growing larger and larger, it would actually pull in plankton. That's actually what it fed on. Now these little guys would do one of two things. They either live in massive groups to help build reefs, or they would live little solitary lives, just by itself on the bottom of the ocean floor. So these horn corals began sometime in the Ordovician period, some 480 million years ago, and flourished until the end of the Permian period in 252 million years ago. Basically what it is that they lived 228 million years, which is an amazing run. And they almost a time and a half more than the dinosaurs lived. Now horn corals actually disappeared at the end of the Permian era. And for some of you, the Permian area may sound familiar because of the Permian extinction, which is also called the Great Dying, where life was nearly snuffed out on Earth. 96% of all marine life died and 70% of all terrestrial life died. And they died from a massive natural global warming event that was geologically instantaneous and en masse. And by geologically instantaneous, we mean several thousand years. What is happening today with our current global warming crisis is that it's been vastly accelerated by humans. What would have taken 1,000 years to come to a certain point, we've done it in 100 years, or even 50 years sometimes. And in a future episode, we're going to dive further into the Great Dying and the other mass extinctions, perhaps sooner than you think. So for Bourbon and Bones, we want to thank you for watching our show tonight. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and remember to join us on Facebook at Bourbon and Bones. Again, in the pinned comment below. And always remember, share a bourbon with someone. Good night.